What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. I wasn't sure if I should make a video about this one. I wasn't sure if I should discuss this because, it's still a few days after the firing of Pete Carroll. It's still a few days after our head coaching relationship with him was terminated. And there are some people who are taking it very hard. There are some people who are very sensitive right now. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to make this video when I saw this yesterday. Initially, I held off, but I want to talk about this a little bit. I think I want to sound off on this just a little bit. I've tried to be relatively diplomatic when it comes to Pete Carroll concerning his departure, because I certainly wasn't always diplomatic about him when he was the head coach here for the last few years. I wanted to try to lay off a little bit now that I got what I wanted, but he had this quote on Seattle Sports Radio yesterday, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. And I want to ask people out there if I'm reading this wrong, or I'm reading too much into it, or I'm projecting something into it. I want to know what you guys think, because I saw this quote and it just kind of bugged me. And I will grant you, I don't really know what I want him to say. I don't know if there's anything he can say that would work other than to just say, I'm not really going to go into that. Like maybe that was the right thing to say, just no comment. But we got this tweet from Dugar here, and he has a quote from Carroll on Seattle Sports yesterday, and basically he was asked about the nature of his firing, how it was mutual, yet also one that Pete did not want, which is kind of a contradiction. So I looked at the quote here, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's really long, and most of you guys have already probably seen it, and a lot of it feels very word salady to me. But I want to summarize what I see from this. So basically, the first part of the quote, this first paragraph here, is him talking about the process of explaining what happened during that season to ownership, to Vulcan, to Jody, etc., explaining why it went wrong and why things didn't end the way that we wanted them to end, why we didn't get to the playoffs, why we didn't make a run, why we didn't improve significantly from the previous year. He does actually kind of take a little bit of a shot at the media, which that part I don't really have a big problem with because it's obviously true and everybody knows it. The media does not know everything about what is going on. They can't. If they do, that's a problem because that means your team has leaks, and you don't want the media knowing everything about you. So that part, I totally get that. So that first part of the quote, he just talks about, okay, this is our process. And then you get to the second part of it where he talks about why he was ultimately dismissed. He basically says, we talk about the things that need to change, the things that need to be fixed in order to make things better. And he talks about how he has a vision on how to fix it. And what he basically said was, I couldn't get Vulcan and Jody and basically the people above me, maybe Bert Cold is part of that as well, to see it my way. And then he goes on to say, it's really hard because they're not football people. They're not coaches. To get to the real details of it is difficult for other people. It's difficult for me to convey stuff to you guys. So that part kind of bugged me. And there's some truth to that, of course. Jody Allen is not a football person. Bert Cold is not really a football person. The people who ultimately made this decision about Pete Carroll are not ultimately football people. I get that. But the undertone that I get from this quote, and again, I want you guys to tell me if you guys think that I'm off or wrong or misreading it or projecting something into this statement. What I kind of get out of it is, well, I'm so smart and so brilliant, and I think about things on such a high level in football that I can't get people who are so far beneath my level of intelligence to understand what I'm saying. I am so much smarter than everybody else, I can't even get them to understand what I'm trying to convey here. That's why I got fired. I'm too smart. I'm too good, and because of that, I couldn't bridge the gap between me and this non-football entity, which is Vulcan, Jody, Bert Cold, etc., etc. So that's kind of the feeling I get here. He's basically saying, I think I have all the answers here, and I think I was ultimately let go because I'm too good at my job almost. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like a guy who is interviewing for a job, and the job interview asks him, what do you think is your biggest weakness? And he says, well, I think I'm too good at my job. That's my biggest weakness. And that's not a real answer, obviously. So that just kind of bugs me. And look, I don't know what he could say necessarily, other than, like I said, he could have just said no comment, or I'm not going to get too far into that. He could have just left that little part of the quote out, and I think it would have been probably a little bit smoother. But as it stands, it just smacks of a guy who thinks he knows everything, knows exactly what needs to be done, knows exactly how to fix it, but he ultimately got pushed out because everyone who was making the decision about him doesn't understand football, and thus they don't understand his brilliance. And I mean, look, I get it on one level, but on the other level, I look at the last 7 years. No one is denying that Pete Carroll knows way more about football than Jody Allen or Burt Cold or anybody working for Vulcan. He knows more about football than most people who have ever lived. He has lived and breathed football for a very, very long time. I know he knows more about football than people like me. Anybody on YouTube. Pete Carroll knows more about football than anybody out there, except for, guys like Bill Belichick and Nick Saban, and maybe you could find some guys who have areas of expertise that beat Pete, like Dom Capers and Wade Phillips. I get all that, but at the same time, look at the last 7 years. I look at this quote. I look at the way that some people are speaking about Pete Carroll, and you'd swear they were talking about somebody who had done more than one playoff game in the last 7 seasons. That's where we are right now, guys. We have 7 straight seasons of Seahawks football with one playoff win to show for it. It was a crappy win, by the way. Literally beating the Eagles practice squad means very little. And this is what Pete thinks went wrong. It seems to be he thinks that, oh, they just didn't understand my brilliance. The reality is, there are very few coaches in the history of the NFL, very few, who could survive a run of 7 seasons with only one playoff win and 0 appearances in the conference championship game. The list is basically Marvin Lewis and Jim Morris Sr., right? Like, that level of ineptitude, keeping your job for that long, it's really those two guys. So I would like to see some level of acknowledgement on his part that, yeah, I wasn't producing enough. I put myself in jeopardy of losing my job because the production just wasn't there. Yeah, we had mostly winning seasons. We had one truly bad season, but we also weren't getting that much further beyond just barely above average. We were a one and done team most of those years. If we got to the playoffs, we won one playoff game that whole time. 7 years. I mean, if I were to sit here and list off all the coaches that have won more than one playoff game over the last 7 seasons, we'd be here for a while. I actually thought about it earlier today, there are at least 16 guys. I can make a list of 16 coaches that have won more than one playoff game over the last 7 seasons just off the top of my head. And some of them are not even very good. I'm not saying they're all better than Pete Carroll, but I'm saying the production from Pete Carroll is not somebody who warrants a quote like this, where he acts like his only problem is that he's too good and too smart. Not even Bill Belichick could survive a run of football producing that little without losing his job. And you know how we know this? You know how we know this? We know this because he didn't. He literally didn't. Bill Belichick has won, like, what was it, 5 playoff games during that same time period that Pete Carroll has won one, including a Super Bowl, been to another Super Bowl, and he still got fired too. Like, I know Bill Belichick bottomed out in a way that Pete Carroll never had, but the high level production from Bill Belichick over the last 7 years has been far better, not even close to what Pete Carroll produced over the last 7 years. And Bill Belichick got pushed out, so Why is Pete Carroll immune to that? And Bill Belichick, the previous window, had accomplished way more than Pete Carroll had too. So this isn't just a having a grace period because of previous accomplishments either. Bill Belichick is the most accomplished head coach in the history of the league. So I don't know. This quote rubs me the wrong way. I don't know. This speaks to his ego. This speaks to his belief that he has done nothing wrong here. This speaks to the belief that I guess he feels like winning one playoff game over the last 7 years should be good enough to just keep your job. That you should be able to keep your job indefinitely as long as you know more about football than the owner. Well, guess what? You're always going to know more about football than the owner because the owner, pretty much 99% of the time, is not going to be a football person. But you know what that owner can do, even though they're not a football person? They can look at the record and say, hey, you have one playoff win in the last 7 years. You have one playoff win in 7 years. Doug Marrone has more than that. Sean McDermott has more than that. Doug Peterson has more than that. Nick Sirianni has more than that. So I don't know if it's possible to get Pete Carroll to acknowledge something like that and just say, hey, look, I wasn't doing a good enough job. I wasn't producing results the way I needed to, and now we're here. I don't know if that's a realistic thing, but I think that would have been better to say than what he actually said. He kind of throws Vulcan and Jody under the bus here. And given the fact that, technically speaking, for now, he still works for this organization, I gotta admit, it strikes me. It strikes me a certain way. All right, I'll see you guys later. Let me know what you guys think. I don't know. This just, maybe it bugs me a little more than it should, but it bugs me. And I feel like he's just blind and ignorant to the fact that the level of success just wasn't there for the past 7 seasons. That is a lifetime in the NFL. We have players who have careers that last 7 seasons or less. All right. Go Hawks. Have fun with the playoffs today. And we'll see what happens next.